We're moving into a world that's going to be filled with a lot of hurt, honestly. And kids need to understand now how best to manage their money, how best to invest.
Welcome to the Bite Your Tongue podcast. I'm Denise, and I'm joined by my good friend, Dr. Ellen Broughton. We've been through many years of parenting together, and now we're ready to talk about the ins and outs of parenting adult children. Your diapering days are over. Now it's time to consider when to bite your tongue. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Bite Your Tongue, one I'm most excited to talk about. Let's just call it finances and your adult kids. I'm Connie Gorant, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Ellen Broughton. Ellen's working in Prague, by the way, so we're still experimenting with our sound systems. We hope you'll be patient. Now let's get to it. All right, money. We're talking about money today. And most important, we're talking about our adult kids and money. Most people would rather talk about their sex life than talk about their money. That's why we want to talk about it. Are you as interested in this topic as I am, Ellen?
Of course I am. Everybody's interested in money. And I mean, it might be more like 50-50 sex and money, but they're both up there, really, definitely up there. So I have to say, as a psychologist who works with kids transitioning into adulthood, I find that money is one of the biggest issues that parents struggle with in terms of how to set limits with it. In terms of their own finances, I find a lot of parents go out of their way to give kids lots of stuff, and it only hurts themselves and their retirement and, their own future. So there's lots to consider when we think about money, and it is a super tough conversation to have, even in the best of families.
I absolutely agree with you. I feel that in my own family. I never know what to say, what not to say, what to offer, what not to offer. But today we're welcoming Jeff Opdyke. I can't even tell you how excited I am to have him here. When I was younger and living in New York, Jeff wrote a really popular column for the Wall Street Journal called Love and Money. It was the one column, honestly, and I'm not joking about this at all. I read that column every week. When he signed off on the column in March around 2011, he wrote this, and I thought it was really interesting. I've always treasured writing this column. I love that it's forced me to look at personal issues that I otherwise could and once did ignore. I love the smart feedback from readers, whether nice or nasty, and it pains me to know that I'll disappoint all those readers who tell me how much this column is an important part of their Sunday routine. Well, that was me. It was my Sunday routine, and I just loved how he delved into personal financial matters that none of us wanted to talk about, and I'm sure he'll do that today. Now, Ellen, you met Jeff in Prague, so I want you to do sort of a formal introduction of him, and then we'll go on.
Well, gee, you know maybe more about Jeff than I do, and I spent a lot of time with Jeff. So a few years ago, worked in Prague for 7 months, and now I have a lifestyle where I am in Boston half of the time and Prague half of the time, so I still see Jeff a lot. And Jeff and I were expats. For any of you who have lived abroad for a short or long period of time, you know that being with other Americans or other people who speak the language are really valuable. And Jeff has been a very valuable friend to me. So let me give you a little bit of information before we let him speak. So Jeff was born and raised in southern Louisiana, and he makes a really mean gumbo, or was it jambalaya, Jeff, that you made?
I made gumbo for you, I think.
It was gumbo. Okay. It broke the stove, but it was delicious. Well, we won't get into that right now. Anyway, he's been traveling the world ever since he ended his column. And even before that, he traveled a lot. He's traveled to nearly 70 countries, currently works as a digital nomad, living and writing from Prague, where he serves as editor and columnist for The Savvy Retiree, writing about retirement lifestyle, travel, and finance. He regularly contributes as well to International Living magazine. And as you know, he spent 17 years covering personal finance and investing for the Wall Street Journal, and then as executive editor for the Sovereign Investor and Total Wealth Insider. Jeff traveled the world meeting with politicians, economists, institutional investors, taxi drivers, waitresses, hotel bellhops, and supermarket checkout clerks to better understand local economies and local consumers. And today, we want you, Jeff, to help us understand 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, and maybe even teens and their parents and their money issues. So I will just turn it right over to you, Jeff, and I won't say anything about the gumbo.
You two know more about me than I do.
This is the most I've learned about you since I've known you for 2 years now. So I know a lot about you now. Thank you, Denise.
When I first started writing the Love and Money column, the very first column I wrote back in, I don't know when it was, 2004, maybe somewhere around there, I specifically noted that trying to have conversations around money with family members and coworkers and friends and whatnot actually was substantially harder than having money about conversations about sex. And I specifically noted that sex is so easy to talk about in America these days, but talk about money and your income and the problems you have with money and the problems you have with your spouse about money. Nobody wants to talk about that. And so that's what the column was all about. And I got to tell you, I learned a great deal over the 10 years or 7 years or whatever it was that I was writing that column. It was every single Sunday. I had 11 million readers. And you're right. I mean, people really, really gravitated to that column. It resonated with so many people. I was in the Tsukiji fish market in Tokyo on a random 4 o'clock in the morning kind of thing when I had jet lag. And I popped into a McDonald's that was open, and there was an American man sitting next to me, and I was trying to help him with the Japanese menu. And we just got to talking, and he asked me why I was there, and I said, I just came over to do some research. I'm a writer for the Wall Street Journal. He goes, where are you from? I'm from Louisiana. From across the room, from across McDonald's, a woman stands up and goes, oh my God, you're Jeff Opdyke. And she came running over. Every Sunday in the Denver Post. I love what you do. You help me dealing with my family and my kids with money. I love it. It's like, it was the craziest thing at a Tsukiji fish market, McDonald's at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So these issues with money and family really, really resonate with people.
Okay, so 2 things. One is I can bet anything that if that woman read the Denver Post, she knows Denise 100%. There's no question about that.
No, but that was too many years ago, Ellen. I was probably in New York back then. But I want to ask a couple questions here. Adult children. I feel like sometimes money can be bait, particularly if you have it. And do parents use it for gaining love? And I read that the biggest challenge is sort of how to provide enough money, or should you provide money as they reach adulthood, but also they don't want to know that there's so much there that they don't have to do anything. And some kids think X amount of money is a whole lot. You could say you have $100,000 and they would be, my parents are rich, I don't have to work. I think some young adults don't even have a concept of what is money and what it takes to live. So I just wonder, as a parent, what do you share with them? How do you start with all this?
Well, you use the term is money bait. And I would say money is more emotional Xanax for parents, because particularly my generation, I'm Gen X, my ex-wife and I, when we were together, we both worked, and I had a relatively high pressure career with the Wall Street Journal, and she had a high pressure career as the chief operating officer of a hospital, and we had a lot of work obligations, and we were living the traditional American life. And we had the McMansion that was too big for a family of 4, and we had the cars, and we had a lake house, and we did everything that families do in my generation, Gen X. And kids they sort of get lost in the mix a little bit. And I don't mean it in a negligent way. I just mean that because you are so busy living your life and providing for, the house and the insurance and the car and the food and going out to dinner and traveling and all the things you want to do, your kids get kind of wrapped up in that and sort of forgotten a little bit. And you realize that as a parent. You realize that I'm not giving my kids the amount of time I need to give my kids. I'm not giving the kids the amount of time I want to give my kids. I'm not spending as much time with them as I want to because I have to do this job. And when that's the case, we revert to money as the solution, because money is the solution to everything we've been told. And it's so much easier to, quote, prove your love by buying your kids something, or, hey, we're going to go to Paris in 3 weeks, or we're going to take you to London, or whatever we're going to do. Let's go to Disneyland. You use money as a way to salve your own nerves, your own shortcomings as a parent. And once you train yourself to do that, it's really hard to get out of that, not only for yourself, but for your kids, because now your kids kind of expect and know how to play the game that I can just go to mom and dad with my sad puppy dog eyes, and I haven't felt love in a long time. And oh my God, just give me a hug, mom. And all the goofy things kids do to play off parents' sentiments. And it's really easy to buy them stuff. I remember still being in a mall in New Jersey when we lived there. My son was probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old. And he was into a card game at the time. This would have been 2003 or 4 or 5. I don't remember what it was. He was into a card game at that time called Yu-Gi-Oh, which was this Japanese trading card kind of thing. And he always wanted to buy boxes of these things. And my wife would always say yes. And there was always these certain cards. There was this little kiosk inside this mall that sold individual cards, not just boxes. And some of the cards were really expensive, rare. They'd go for like $100. Here's a 5 or 6 year old who wants a $100 Yu-Gi-Oh card. And my wife would give in and buy it for him because she felt guilty. And she told me specifically she felt guilty. We had this conversation all the time. And I would say, like, I can't believe you just spent $100 on a piece of cardboard for him. And she goes, well, it's not the cardboard. It's the fact that I'm doing something with him and I'm making him happy. I said, well, can't you just make him happy other ways? Do things we used to do as kids when you and I were young, Well, no, because I'm never home and I want to do things with him. And this is a way to, to be together. It's like, all right, I'm not going to argue with you about this. I mean, you got to do things the way you want to do it. But that's how parents get themselves wrapped up in this money game, and kids learn to play it.
Okay, so 2 things I want to say. One with my psychologist hat on, and that is that we don't really need to do this. Like, we really and truly do not need to give our kids things. This is the first generation in history where parents actually think they have to please their kids and make them happy. And so busy parents are okay. I mean, kids can be well loved even when their parents are busy. That's how kids have been raised since the beginning of history until like basically our generation. And I can't believe, Jeff, you're only a few years younger than I am, and you call yourself Gen X, and you're almost a boomer. But okay, I'm going to let that go. The other thing I want to say is, are you telling me all of those Yu-Gi-Oh cards are not worth anything? Because that's what I was depending on for my retirement.
A lot of those things are worth a lot now.
Okay, then I'm going to have to go looking for them.
I want to say just one thing to what Ellen said. I'm not sure we're the first generation. I'm definitely a boomer. I'm older than both of you, but guilty of everything that Jeff has said. I don't know if I was a stay-at-home mom for a lot of time and worked part-time. So I had a lot of time with them. I still wanted them to have everything. And, I remember standing in line at the holidays for what were those Beanie Babies, the number one Beanie Baby. And it wasn't just me. It was 15 other, hundreds of mothers, I should say, in line trying to get the Peace Bear. What the heck were we thinking?
Yeah, but Denise, I think the difference between God and this generation, I'm talking about us. I mean, I think
right.
Is that every parent wanted to do that, but they didn't stand in line for Beanie Babies. They didn't spend $100 on a card. Your father would have said that's absolutely ridiculous.
You're right.
And so that's the difference. There has really been a shift in how we, and that's where Jeff comes in terms of, consumerism and economics and all sorts of other issues that go beyond psychology.
I will jump in on Denise's side on this to a certain degree, because I saw this perspective. I see this from 2 perspectives. So I grew up with my grandparents. And my grandfather was born in 1912, my grandmother in 1921. And my mom was born in 45, right after the war. So I saw the family financial dynamic from grandparents and their offspring, and then my mom and me. And I got to say, and no disrespect to you two, but I think baby boomers are some of the most financially ignorant people on the planet.
Okay, so we're barely baby boomers. I think there's another word for me because I'm not a boomer, way too young to go to Woodstock and too young to even babysit if my siblings, if my parents went to Woodstock, but yet not quite.
I'm a boomer and I'm going to agree with him. So
yeah, I'm younger than Denise. Let's just make a note of that. Keep going, Jeff.
So what I saw, and I'm going to come back around to the financially ignorant part. What I saw was my grandmother wanted to give my mom every single thing my mom wanted in her life, to the degree that my mom grew up thinking that she was a princess born in the wrong era. And I see a lot of that in the boomer generation. The boomers spend money like it's going out of style. They were the ones that wanted to keep up with the Joneses. And I don't think Gen X is like that at all. Gen X is a much different generation. But I saw this with my mom and my grandmother. And I remember my mom telling me when I was 9 years old and she had just spent a bunch of money doing something. And I asked her about it. And she goes, if money was made for saving, God would have made everything free. And her perspective was, whatever money you have, you just spend it to live the happiest, best life you can. And she died a few years ago, literally penniless, didn't have a penny to her name when she died. I see too much of that in a lot of the boomers that I dealt with when I was writing my column, that I hear from today, who don't have enough money saved because they've spent it all along the way on buying this house and then the second house and then the third house and this car and then the Suburban. And I just don't think boomers are a financially literate group. And I know there's a lot of boomers who are going to get mad at me saying that, but that's my perspective as a financial writer talking to them for 20 years.
I do think that is, I'm not going to argue with you on that point, but I don't think that it's, again, your mom being the exception, but not the exception, but parenting has only morphed into more than that, I think, in terms of what you're saying, that where every parent thinks their child is a princess or a president in training or the future CEO. And so it's gotten worse, I think. And I don't know from a financial standpoint, from a psychological standpoint.
I agree with you on that. I mean, what I'm getting at is that maybe it skips a generation. I don't know. I mean, my grandmother was very frugal with money, except when it came to my mom, and she would give my mom anything my mom wanted up until the day my mom died. My grandmother outlived my mom.
Oh my gosh.
And my grandmother was literally working into her 80s to help pay for my mom's life. I'm totally the opposite. I mean, I'm much like my grandmother in that I am much more frugal. I'm not going to go off and do stupid things with my money like my mom did. But that said, I agree with what Ellen is talking about in that I am weak when it comes to my son and my daughter. When they want something, I kind of cave in, not all the time, not on a lot of big things. Like Ellen and I were having this conversation a couple of weeks ago, actually. My son is 25 years old. And he has a job, and he needs car insurance. And at 25, being a 25-year-old male in South Louisiana, your car insurance is just shy of the gross national product of most Caribbean nations. He doesn't have enough money for it. And his mom calls me and she goes, I'm giving him all this money to pay for a third of it. He's going to come up with a third, and you can come up with a third. And it's like, no. And not to be morbid about this, but his grandfather just passed away on his mom's side and left him several $1,000s. It's plenty enough for him to go pay for his car insurance. But my ex-wife is like, well, no, he shouldn't have to do that. It's like, wait a minute. When you and I were 25 years old and we needed to pay for car insurance, we didn't call our parents and say, oh, can you give me money? And if my grandfather at the time had passed away and left me several $1,000s just so my insurance is coming due, I'm celebrating the fact that he had enough life insurance that he could help me pay for my car insurance. I'm not going to go call somebody else up in my family and say, hey, I need money to pay for my car insurance, because they're going to say, wait a minute, you just got a bunch of thousands of dollars from your grandfather's passing. Can't you pay for your own car insurance? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so it's interesting. I think there's so many different life stories here, and all three of us are kind of in different, I don't want to say complete generations, but even separated by a few years. So there's all these different scenarios, you know what I mean, that each of us are faced with. But I think that's true for almost every kid. But I think the real question here is, and I think you brought it up so perfectly, Jeff. I know so many parents paying for cell phone plans, car insurance, a new car, part of their rent when they get started. And I'm trying to say to my kids, listen, you have to learn at some point what it takes to live. What are all these small expenses that you forget about? So how do parents control this? And what do we do when so many people around us are paying for the kids' car insurance, paying for half of their rent, paying for their deductibles? What are the steps for us to get them to live completely financially independent?
Nancy Reagan said it best.
Say no.
I mean, that's true. I mean, I had this conversation with my grandmother many, many, many times because she would be crying because my mom was financially abusing her. And my grandmother knew it, but my grandmother could not say no to her daughter for anything. I mean, anything my mom wanted, my grandmother gave her. I don't care what it was. I had to have these conversations with my grandmother all the time. You have to say no. You have to say no. You have to let her stand on her own 2 feet at some point. If she falls on her butt, that's her fault and she'll learn from it. You can't continue to pay for her life. And my grandmother would cry and she would say, I understand what you're saying is true, but she's my daughter. I can't say no. There's no other simple answer. I mean, it is as simple as learning to say no. Take a stand for yourself. Take a stand for your future. Take a stand for your own retirement. Take a stand for your own wallet and say no. If you can't afford to give your child something, if you think they should they should earn it for themselves, then make that stand and say no.
And I think, Jeff, you're talking about a wide range of saying no. And what Denise was saying with cell phone or insurance, I think, and guilty, my 32-year-old daughter is still on my phone plan. I'm hoping when she gets married, she has her own family plan because family does imply new family. However, that is something I could say no to. Seriously, that's a conversation that you can just bring up and just say, listen, this is a little ridiculous. What's the solution here? But what you're talking about is the other end of the spectrum that people do struggle with, which is being taken advantage of their children. And it happens in lots of families where the son doesn't have a job anymore and they step in and that, those sorts of issues can be helped with getting therapy, getting a financial planner, getting more support. And I sort of imagine your grandmother didn't have a lot of that support. Like, it's really hard when you're faced with a child who either is truly struggling or has mental health issues or drug issues or any number of things that you might need to seek out extra support for that.
You're right. My grandmother didn't have that kind of support, and she didn't have the money to afford that kind of support. But the demands that my mom was putting on her were everything from $1,800 mattresses all the way down to, I want $100 to go to Whole Foods. So it was the entire range of, my grandmother needed to say no to the small stuff, and my grandmother needed to say no to the big stuff, and she never could. And I think there are a lot of parents, and I guarantee I am one of them at times with my own kids, that just can't say no to certain things.
Well, but I think it's a continuum here. Your grandmother and your mother's relationship sounds very extreme. And I think that goes on a lot. And I know situations that parents were bankrupt because they took second mortgages out on their homes to support their adult child who wasn't flourishing and all that sort of thing. But I think, to treat your adult child to a dress when you're out shopping or something, if you're able, is not the worst thing in the world. But I guess, and so I think there's a real sort of, continuum here from one, or extremes from one to the other. But anyway, what I really want to know is, as they get into their 30s, late 20s, they're working, they're doing okay. You're not supporting them, but they haven't had a lot of financial education. So we have not been good at providing them, help them on that route. Or do I encourage them to get a financial planner? How do they find a financial planner? I think even when you have a kid that's on their own 2 feet, they have had no experience or no teachings on really how to plan their life financially.
I actually dealt with this in a column years ago. I can't remember when. But in this particular case, you're talking about, go buy somebody a dress. There's nothing wrong with that. I totally agree with that. By the same token, I would use that money and go find a financial planner that only works by the hour and isn't trying to sell product, and buy an hour's worth of time and give it to your child and say, you know what? I probably didn't do the best job of teaching you about finance in life, but I found a pro who I really want you to go to and spend an hour with. You don't ever have to go back if you don't want to, but just go spend an hour with him or her and learn about what you need to be doing in terms of preparing for your own future, because I may have come up short in telling you what you need to do. I think that's a great way to get kids to sort of engage with this on their own schedule, their own time. Let them go whenever they want, and give it to them as just a gift, and let them learn from somebody who is not a parent, who they're going to look at as saying, "Oh, mom is trying to, hit me over the head with this financial." And let somebody else tell them the truth, an independent third party who's not invested in their future.
That sounds like such great advice.
Do you have any suggestion on how they go about then selecting this person?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to Google and you can find the fee only financial planners. There's a whole organization of these people, and I would just begin to doing a little bit of research that way. Maybe call 2 or 3 of them and talk to them yourself before you even hire them, and tell them what you're trying to accomplish. Gauge your own gut reaction. Is this somebody I would use personally? Or again, talk to people in your own life who have used financial planners. Maybe talk to lawyers who have gone to planners, or who may even know planners. Just don't hire people like at banks and places like that, because all they want to do is sell you product. You really want a fee only financial planner who's not going to care what products you use or how you structure your financial life. They're just there to give you advice on what's best for you.
Yeah, I did that myself with my CPA, the person who's been doing my taxes forever. And I just said, I got money from my work that I could use for financial planning for a year. It was like something just to benefit from work. And I used that with him, and it was such great. I don't remember how much it was, but $1,000 worth of time of his. And because it was a time limited issue, he wasn't expecting me to invest with him or do anything. It was a great experience.
So another question is, does it matter if they're in there? Like, I have a kid in LA and a kid in New York. Does it matter if the planner is in their city, or could it be anywhere? Because I do have a lot of friends with recommendations in Colorado, but I wonder, should my daughter have someone in LA and should my son have someone in New York?
I mean, I guess I don't know that it matters, but personally, I would want to sit down with that person. I don't want to do things on the phone. And I say that as a reporter who spent his life on the phone with people or interviewing people in person. And I can tell you, when you're on the phone, you're always distracted. You're always ready to get off the phone. The person on the other line is ready to get off the phone because they're distracted. They've got other things to do. And when you sit down with them in front of them, it's a totally different engagement. And people open up. When I'm on the phone interviewing people, they just want to get off. When I sit in front of them, they tell me their life. They just completely open up. So I would much rather go to a planner I can sit with, because I think they're going to be more engaged in me and wanting to talk to me and wanting to show me how smart they are about things.
Interesting. And when do you think parents of adult children should let their kids know about their finances? Be it a lot or a little, that maybe they're going to have to depend on their kids later on, or maybe not? Or when do you have that talk? What do they need to know?
Well, my grandmother sat me down one day, and she was probably 80 years old. She died at 94. So this was 14 years before she died. And she said, "I want you to come over, and I want an hour." I said, "What do you need?" "Just come over and spend an hour." It's like, all right. So I went over, and she's at the kitchen table. She was waiting for me, and she had a little brown manila folder, and it had every single document in her life that she thought was important. 40% of them were not important, but that's fine. Who cares? But she laid out everything. Here's where the insurance is. Here's the burial policy. Here's the flowers I want. Here is the title to the car. Here's where I keep the spare key, everything. She just laid out everything. And honestly, again, it was 14 years too early, but it did make life easier for me when she did finally pass, because I had all this stuff and I knew where everything was, and I knew all the account numbers, and I knew her old employee number at Allied Chemical when she was there, in the 1970s, and that was now part of BASF. So I had all this stuff, and I think it's really important for parents to put that kind of information together so that they can present it to their children one day, not when you're 60 or 65, But maybe when you feel like time is getting closer, maybe there's some kind of terminal illness thing or not, who knows, whatever the reason is. But at some point, even in your 60s, you should alert your children to the idea that, hey, there are financial issues I want you to know about. I know my death is not something that you want to talk about, but at some point you do realize that mom is not going to be here anymore. And there are financial issues that we need to talk about. I don't want to hit you with those things right now because I know it's like out of the blue, but I want you to pick a time at some point in the next year. And I want you to call me and say, hey, mom, let's have that talk. Get yourself in the mode, you, the child, of accepting the fact that a parent is going to die at some point, and that a parent has these needs to tell you what they want, to tell you where things are, so that they're trying to make life easier for you. You know, you have a need, you're going to have a need to know this stuff at some point. They have a need to want to tell you about it now. So you, the parent, say, hey, let's get together at some point in the future when you feel comfortable, and let's go through this stuff. And I'm not going to lay out everything for you in morbid detail, but I just want you to know where things are. And then at some point later in life, 10 years pass by, whatever, 15 years, and everything's, you're still alive and whatnot. Then you might have a bigger conversation that says, okay, here's everything. Here's what I want you to do if I'm incapacitated. Here's where the money is to support that kind of stuff. Whatever the details are, that's when you go through those real hardcore details.
Okay, so that was great, Jeff. Just to step it back for a minute, because I want to make sure we get to this, because I think people are curious about this. A lot of parents spend money on their kids' down payments, their kids' weddings, college, all sorts of big ticket items. Are there any kind of hard and fast rules? We're not really talking, people who are very wealthy, go for it, like do what you can for your child, whatever, spend the money. I have friends who have a lot of money and they're like, I'd rather just spend it while my kids are here. That's fine. But we're talking to people who actually might have 20 years of being retired and maybe have 3 years where they are incapacitated. What are the hard and fast rules for people to remember in terms of what to give their kids and what to keep for themselves? And kind of not even look at it from a psychological standpoint, but from a financial standpoint.
I don't think there are any hard and fast rules. I think that you give to the degree that you feel comfortable.
But that's the problem, is most people don't know what that number is.
There is no number. There is a feeling. There is a sense. Like with my child, if my son Zachary called me and said, hey, Dad, he and I are both into crypto trading and all that stuff. And if he called me and said, hey, Dad, I really need you to send me $300 to my account in Bitcoin because I want to do X, I would have no problem with that. It's not a financial pain for me. But when he calls and says, I want $2,500 to pay for car insurance, that rings a different bell in my world. And I'm going to say no to something like that because it is an intolerance issue. I've reached the point of pain. Not that $2,500 would kill me. It's the $2,500 plus the idea that he's 25 years old and should be able to manage his own finances at this stage. That hits me. So if I'm 65 years old and my daughter calls up and says, hey, can you put me on your cell phone plan for the next year because X, Y, and Z happened in my life? Absolutely. Wouldn't bother me one bit. Can you help me pay my car insurance at that point? Yeah, wouldn't bother me. Hey, I really want to go on a cruise with my boyfriend or my husband. I want to take the kids with me or whatever. That's going to hit me a different way. So you just have to know how it hits you, what feels okay and what feels not right. And when it feels not right, that's when you have to say no.
I think you're overestimating most people's capacity to do that. I mean, because
true.
We're also talking about like big ticket items, like a wedding. Like, let's say somebody has, I don't know, pick a number, like what percentage of their retirement should they spend on a wedding or on their child's college education? Or
there is no number for that kind of stuff, because if I look at my account and I have, I'm just going to pick a random number. If I have $200,000 in my retirement account and I am 62 years old and my daughter comes to me and she says, Dad, I want a destination wedding with you and all of the family, and Bob and all of his family want to show up, and we want to do it in Punta del Este, Uruguay, in the height of summer, and it's going to cost us $43,000. I'm going to say you can go jump off the nearest bridge, because that's a financial pain. $43,000 of my $200,000, that's a huge number. Now, if she comes to me and says, Dad, we want to have a wedding. I know you can't afford a bunch of money, but could you give us $2,500 to afford X? Absolutely, that's fine. I'll do that. So it's not that there is a hard and fast rule to anything. It is a pain threshold relative to how much money I have in my world to play with. If I think it's going to substantially degrade my lifestyle going forward and put me at risk when I'm 70 or 90 or whatever age I reach, I'm going to say no. And then you have to say, and I know what you're saying about people don't have the capacity to do that, but you have to find that capacity. Otherwise, you're going to be in a situation when you are 85, 90 years old where you don't have the money and you're worried about living off cat food. And then you're going to call your child, and your child's going to be in a financial situation where they can't give you the money.
Well, I think that goes back to almost our very first conversation, that parents feel, I can't remember what you said at the beginning, but sort of not obligated, but and bait was the word I used, but you want to say yes to buying love. You want to say yes to the wedding because they'll love you more. I'll give up my retirement money because I just want you to be happy. Because if you're happy, you're going to love me more, and I'm going to be a better parent.
I also think parents just do it just because. They just send their kids to a private college just because, not because they think their child will love them more, but just because that's what everybody does. And so, I see so many families in debt and devastated when their child drops out in their first year of college or they don't complete college, and then they're in, $300,000 worth of debt that's coming out of their retirement account that is $400,000 after a lifetime's worth of work. So I think part of it is loving, but part of it is that's just kind of how we are socialized. And you're right, you have to find the capacity to sort of think of yourself. And even I have lots of conversations with friends who are going to spend a lot of money on their child's education for a child who's really not that interested in doing anything. I'll say you can borrow your child can borrow money for school, or they can go to an in-state school, but you can't borrow for your retirement. But people don't tend to think that way. And maybe it's back to that boomer generation, that me, it's sort of like that me generation, which we've got sort of both narcissism for ourselves, but also for our kids. Like, it's all about me, it's all about you. And so we're in this symbiotic relationship where we just want to satisfy our most extreme desires in some ways.
Yeah, I do think there is a lot of the keeping up with the Joneses. I think that is much more an American issue because we have become such an aspirational culture over the last 30 years, maybe. And people want to prove that they're living the American dream, even though the American dream is slowly getting destroyed by the reduction of the middle class or the hollowing out of the middle class. But people just want to live that American middle class dream lifestyle that was so prevalent in the 1950s and 60s, and that began to die in the 70s, and I would argue went away completely in the 1990s. So yeah, that's a big issue I think parents have today, is trying to live a dream that no longer exists.
And that's making kids more anxious and depressed than ever in history. So that's the outcome of this, is kids are much, much, much less happy than they've ever been. So,
although I think some kids in my kids' generation are choosing simpler lives. They saw this whole cycle and they're choosing simpler lives. But I want to ask a couple other questions. One is that if you have one kid doing very, very well and one kid struggling, how do you deal with, helping one and not helping the other? And how do you deal with that in your will?
Yeah, that's I had that question a lot when I was writing the column. And parents always want to gravitate towards helping the child who doesn't have much and who is failing. And it makes perfect sense why you would. It's like, John is doing great, but Greg is doing horrible. I've got to help Greg because I know John is okay. The problem, and this gets into Ellen's world. The problem is that John then begins to feel a little pissed, honestly, because the parents are doing everything for Greg. And why can't Greg get off his butt and do it for himself, Because now Greg is eating into my inheritance from mom and dad. And you get into a lot of sibling hatreds there, honestly. I mean, that's Ellen's world, but I can tell you from the financial side that you create a lot of animosity between siblings when you begin to favor one over the other, even when one of them is struggling.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Well, I was just going to say, there's even this assumption that you're leaving your kids an inheritance, which I'm even unclear about whether that's something we should do. Like, seriously, why should I be working 2 jobs in order for my kids to have an inheritance? Or why should we work till we're 75? Or, most people I know work till they're 70. And in my world, at least, because part of that is they want to make sure that they don't impose on their kids. So should we leave an inheritance for our kids?
Well, it's a really good question. And I do think about that in my own life. I am not structuring my life so that I can leave an inheritance to my children. That said, I own a lot of unique assets, everything from rare coins to collectible sports cards I had when I was a kid that are like high grade kind of stuff. The assets I buy are hard assets. They're collectible assets that I am either going to sell if I ever need to when I retire, and I don't think I will need to do that, or I'm going to leave them to my kids, which is exactly why I really bought them. I'm not aiming my life at not spending enough in retirement just so I can leave money to my kids. I am structuring my life so that I have money to live my life when I'm retired. And if there's money left over, hey, great, whatever, my kids benefit. But they're going to get a huge windfall of all these assets that are going to be worth a whole lot at some point. I mean, I'm buying high quality stuff that appreciates in value. And I think they're going to appreciate that because now they have something that is much more like an heirloom kind of thing, sort of, as opposed to just a check from an insurance company. And if they want to sell it, hey, great, they'll make a bunch of money off of it, and that's fine. And if they don't, then they still have something that they could pass on to one day to their kids. So that's how I view inheritance. I come at it from that perspective. I also come at it from the perspective of when I get like a large payday on some particular thing, like I wrote a screenplay, as you know.
I don't know. I want to hear about that after this.
Ellen knows about it, as I was mentioning. But like when you get paydays for things like that, I stick money into an annuity for my kids that they're not going to be able to touch until they're like 67 or whatever their retirement age is going to be, 70 at that point. Who knows? So I'm giving them a different kind of inheritance. I'm giving them their own retirement to a certain degree by taking some of my money today that I don't really need and sticking it in an annuity that's going to grow for the next X decades and that they're going to tap into one day and they're going to go, wow, Dad was brilliant.
Do they know about this annuity?
No, they don't. I'm not telling them.
I hope they don't listen. I want to go back to one thing. I have 2 things I need to go back to. One is that about supporting Greg or John. Okay. I think there's 2 situations in this. Greg could have some real health issues. I think when a kid's working hard and something goes wrong in their life, John and the parents want to help. When Greg is just a complete, mess up and isn't working and is lazy and is failed at everything and not working hard, that's a different situation. So I think we have to look at it that way. The other thing is I've always thought when they're helping Greg and not John, John's almost being punished for being successful.
Yes.
And working hard.
It's a facts and circumstances issue. You're right. If there is an illness, John is clearly going to recognize that mom and dad are trying to help my brother live, trying to get my brother healthy, whatever. That's a different, I'm going to go back and have a caveat there. That's far different than John going off to college and studying to be a doctor or an astrophysicist or whatever he's going to be. And he's made a successful career. And Greg decided to skip out of college because he wanted to be a professional surfer, but not really. He just wanted to live in California on the beach and get high every day and go surf every once in a while and never really put any effort into it. And now he's 37 years old and he has no job and, working behind the cash register at a small surf shop on the beach in San Clemente is not really covering his life, and mom and dad are helping him. That's a different world. I mean, that's a huge difference. So it's a facts and circumstances issue.
Okay, Ellen's looking at her clock. I could talk to you for the rest of my day, but I think we're going to wrap it up now.
I think you'll just have
and
to
maybe
come
we'll
to
come
Prague
back,
with
Jeff.
me.
You're in what, Ellen?
You're just going to have to come to Prague. And
I'm going to have to come to Prague, and we're going to have to do it from Prague. That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
This was just such a great episode. You know, you can look for a lot of Jeff's work if you Google his name, as well as you have actually, I need to ask one more question before we end. I'm so sorry. You wrote so many different books, you know, the Wall Street Journal's Complete Guide to Personal Finance, preparing your kids for financial life. What do you give me 3 key things that you think kids need to know that we haven't provided them? Maybe you covered that in Piggyback. It was called Piggy Banking, preparing your financial life for kids and your kids for financial life. What do you need to let your kids know? For those of us that missed the boat and didn't do it, how about those that still have a chance?
So if you have younger kids, the thing that I would do is teach them about saving. Show them that money is tied to work. Don't give them an allowance just because you can afford to give them an allowance. Make them work at some challenge, at some chore for that. It doesn't have to be anything hard, but something that shows them that money is tied to effort, that it's not just mom and dad have a piece of plastic and every time we go to the restaurant, he pulls the plastic out and pays for it, because that's just a video game. They don't care about that. It doesn't mean anything. There's no effort in that you didn't see any effort to earn the money that went on that credit card that allowed them to pay for dinner. So make sure your kids understand that there is effort tied to the earning of money. I would teach them as much as you can about saving and as much as you can about investing. And you may not know anything about that, and that's fine. Go find a book that teaches that kind of stuff. Go find a financial advisor who is an expert in talking to children. Those guys are out there, because we're moving into a world where tomorrow's adults need as much financial education as they could possibly have, because the economy we're moving into in America is not going to be a very good economy, despite what's going on right now. And you've got, job growth, all that kind of stuff that's happening. We're moving into a world that's going to be filled with a lot of hurt, honestly. And kids need to understand now how best to manage their money, how best to invest. It doesn't have to be anything complicated. I mean, investing can be something as simple as, we go to McDonald's all the time, and I know you love the double cheeseburger. Let's go buy you some shares of McDonald's and show them what that process is like. We always go to Home Depot with Dad. Let's go buy 1 share of Home Depot, and let me show you what that's all about and how this thing grows and why it grows and how we make more money at it. Better yet, find a company they really like that's really cool, like Apple Computer or something like that. Buy them a share and let them get a dividend payment every quarter. Let them see that money coming in the check. Don't let it go to your brokerage account. Own the share directly so that the dividend check comes into your mailbox, so that kid can see, I get money every 3 months. Wow, that's cool. Those are the kind of lessons that you need to teach young kids, because now it's going to begin to resonate with them as they get older. And I'm seeing that with my own son. He knew that I worked in personal finance and I was always investing and things like that. He never cared about it. He's 25 now, and he calls me all the time with stock market tips. And Dad, what do you think about this company? And Dad, how does this crypto thing work in terms of the processes they want to do that are going to change this industry and that industry? They get interested in that kind of stuff when they realize that it's going to help them live their life better, that there's more money out there that they can earn passively from investing than they're going to earn working their butt off every day.
Gosh, so much great advice. I can't even tell you what a pleasure it's been chatting with you today, Jeff. We really enjoyed it. And I feel like I got to talk to this writer I admired and followed most of my young adult life. So thank you again. For our listeners, if there are questions we didn't get to today that you still have, let us know on our social media platforms. We can always ask Jeff back for episode 2, Money and Your Adult Children, something we all need to keep talking about. In any event, we hope you're enjoying the podcast. Let us know what you thought of today's episode, and also any topics you want to hear covered in the future. You can also share any advice you might have on parenting adult children. We really want to keep the conversation going, and we want to hear from you. In about 2 weeks, we will drop our next episode celebrating Mother's Day. We're going to talk to a couple of amazing moms of adult kids. Don't miss it. And then remember, the wedding episode is coming right after that. So if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, make sure to subscribe and give us 5 stars. And finally, a quick shout out to our behind-the-scenes engineers. Thanks so much to Mike Diorio, our software engineer and teacher extraordinaire. Thanks also to Connie Fisher, who's our ongoing software engineer. These behind-the-scenes people make the magic happen. Thank you all so much. And until next time, remember, sometimes you just have to bite your tongue.